Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Right now, I want to talk to you about the difference between love and enmeshment. Or one way that we can say it is love and fake love. Well, maybe one of the reasons you don't feel very loved or loving is because we might not be operating in love, but fake love. So what is that? What does it mean? How does it look? We'll get to that in just a second. But before you do, like, subscribe, share this video, comment down below if you have other questions or if there's something you'd like me to talk about. Would love to talk to you. All right, let's get started. It's so interesting with all the different ways we have to talk to each other these days that so many people don't feel loved. They don't feel connected. Well, why is that? Well, perhaps partially because we are living in fake love and not true love. Or perhaps we don't realize that there's relationships that we really want something out of it, but are really actually unhealthy and aren't recognizing the difference. So let's go to Proverbs 28, and it says this: a king who sits on the throne of judgment winnows out evil with his eyes. So this is something that's a leadership principle, but it can apply to our regular everyday life, because if you are a Christian, we should all be leaders, even if it's just leaders by example. But the truth is one of the leadership giftings is we have to be able to identify when something is wrong or not. There's unhealth when you get to extremes. If you overtrust people and are naive and allow people to always take you for a ride and trick you, that's not good leadership. That's not healthy. All right. We are, love is to assume the best, but the Bible also calls us to be wise. So we give people a benefit of the doubt, but we also, as it says here, we need to have wisdom. Well, what does that mean? Well, sometimes some of us have good discernment in the moment, and sometimes it takes time to be able to see things. That's why sometimes you don't want to just jump into a relationship, because that sometimes takes time. But you also don't want to undertrust, where you're always looking and questioning people's motives. If you are to hand out judgment or discernment or decisions, we have to have wisdom. So what I want to do today is talk to you about trying to identify love and fake love so that we can have wisdom in discerning when something's healthy or not. And the truth is this is probably true of all of us at different times of our life. But some people live in fake love, or what we'd call enmeshment. And enmeshment is just one type of fake love, but it is a really popular one. And while all of us need to have grace for each other, because there may be times when we struggle with some of these things, some people, that is where they spend most of their time, and we need to be aware of it so we know how to deal with it. So what I want to do is kind of share with you from different excerpts of an article I wrote years ago on this very issue. But first, I want to tell you what enmeshment means, so it's not just a big word. All right, it says this: enmeshment refers to a condition where two or more people weave their lives and identities around one another so tightly that it is difficult for any one of them to function independently. So enmeshment can happen within a couple, it can happen within a family, within an organization. I've actually seen this even in churches at different times, or sometimes small groups. And the danger of enmeshment is that on the surface, it can very much look like intimacy and love, but in reality, it's very unhealthy. So on the surface, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Here's the difference. Intimacy is motivated by love, but enmeshment is motivated by fear and control. So let me give you some examples so we actually know what this actually looks like. So most families would be disappointed, or at least, mourning the fact if their young person goes away to college, and they might even try to offer different scenarios. So they would go to school closer or take a job nearby. And that's something that families normally do. You're disappointed or you're concerned about them not being around. And that's just healthy. You want to create opportunities or let them see things in a different way. An enmeshed family will try to control them and try to manipulate them. And if they don't listen, try to domineer them, or what we'd call cutoffs. So a cutoff is something that happens a lot with enmeshed people and families. Could be in jobs as well. People who are enmeshed, the way they operate, if they don't get what they want, because everything's about fear and control, they will cut off a person because they're not getting what they want out of it. Or in a friendship, an enmeshed friendship would be where someone expects you to share everything in your life. And if you don't, you're hiding something. You're not being honest. They want you, it's not intimacy where you guys have the freedom to share and not share when you're not ready to. It is, if you don't tell me, then you are enmeshed. Now, there are situations in a friendship or in a job where it's like, look, this is important. You need to tell somebody what is going on. That does happen. But enmeshment, this is a constant thing where if you don't share right now, then you're not really my friend. I can't trust you. There's no room for secrets. It's about control and fear. Also, enmeshed friends expects you to feel the same way about something as they do. And not even talking about like concrete, really important things, peripheral things. If you don't agree with them on every issues, especially hot topic issues like masks or vaccines or how you feel about this movie or this celebrity or that celebrity, if you don't agree with me, then you're not really one of us. You're not really close to me. You're done. And I know those are hot topic. I used hot topic issues on purpose. Enmeshment. Now, you may feel it's okay to feel sincere and to have conversations where like, hey, let's talk about this because this matters. I need you to kind of see things from my perspective. But enmeshment is, if you don't agree with me, then we're done. And that can look in different ways. That can be like aggressive, like I'm totally done and you don't talk to that person again unless they capitulate, unless they give in. Or it could be passive aggressive, where you kind of pull back and you kind of attack them from different ways. Or we simply withdraw completely, or at least emotionally. And in marriages, sometimes that can happen and we try to hold money. Well, if you don't agree with me on this, you're not going to get this amount of money. Or sometimes you withhold sex. If you don't agree with me, then you're not going to get this from me. This is indications that there's enmeshment. It's fake love. It's all about control. Give me what I want. And if you don't, you're not really with me. You don't really love me. You don't get my love. Enmeshed people will help, of course, but with a price. Because if they help, it comes with a price tag. You owe them. We're true friendship. We give and take. We serve one another without expecting equally in return. Enmeshment is based in fear and control to try to control every potential outcome possible. Sometimes the passive aggressive form is that they will tell everybody but Jessica what their problem is with Jessica. You could have been friends before, but now they're upset, so they won't come directly to you. They'll go to everyone else. Now, some forms of enmeshment and there's a lot of other factors, by the way, if you're watching this and you're a health professional, there's a lot of things that play into this. But these are things that come out often in enmeshed individuals and families. Enmeshment can reveal itself in marriages. Maybe a wife doesn't want to see her husband really succeed beyond herself because there's a fear that if he does, she won't be needed, but there's a control thing. Of course, perhaps sometimes codependency also plays into that as well, but that someone is always trying to limit what the other person is doing because enmeshed, we have to do things the same. I kind of see this sometimes in ministry, and sometimes not even in ministry, but in couples where one person wants the other spouse or friend to do all the same things to them all equally. And on the surface, that sounds good and healthy, like, oh, we're together. We should be doing things together. And if you're married or you're friends, then yeah, it's cool to be able to serve together sometimes. Or it's good to be able to hang out or do ministry together. But here's the reality. They're going to have giftings you don't. They're going to have different spiritual giftings that you don't. So you cannot expect them to be the same as you all the time. In fact, that's not very loving or caring because you are not seeing them as an individual person who has different giftings and talents than you do. It's like we are one thing. And of course, if you're married, you're one in Christ Jesus. But the truth is we're still different. My wife and I have different giftings, different talents. We are one, but we're also different people. You know, it's both and. We are one together. We're a unit. But because we're one, I want to husband my wife to be the best you possibly can be. Often people who are meshed often have been hurt by other people or controlled by other people. Sometimes they even go through a season of life where they've screwed up, or perhaps a parent over-babied them to some degree and protected them, or perhaps they were in a season of addiction, or where, if they're Christians, maybe they were a season where they're living very wildly, and there was a season where their development and maturity was interrupted. And so they may be 40, 50, 60 years old, but sometimes they're acting like they're in their teens or 20s. And so they're trying to control because sometimes, you know, when we're younger and immature and fearful, sometimes we do those little things, you know, and you can imagine somebody in middle school going, Oh, well, you won't sit with me? Well, you're no longer part of our group. You see things like that happen with kids. So sometimes someone's development has been interrupted. But if you don't see it for what it is, it's not healthy, there's a impediment to their own growth, then you might not be able to address it in a mature, healthy way. 1 Corinthians 13 says this: love is not jealous or boastful or proud. Love does not demand its own way, and it keeps no record of when it has been wronged. Love always expects the best of people, and that's implied not the worst. So the point of this is that enmeshment is based in fear and control. So what will happen is if someone's in an enmeshed situation, and they might not even realize it, they might not even see that this person is enmeshed, and perhaps even the family that they came from is enmeshed, or other individuals are enmeshed. Um, but but what ends up happening is they can frequently feel like they have to choose their spouse or somebody else that they really like, or their spouse or their job, or their spouse and a dream. Now the truth is, when you get married, sometimes you do sacrifice different things. But as you know, I've sacrificed a lot of things, my wife has sacrificed, but ultimately we want to see each other thrive and grow. And there are seasons where we sacrifice more than perhaps the other person does. But again, so this is something that there's some give and take, because there is sacrifice. It does happen. At the same time, there's a point where it becomes unhealthy. I want my wife to thrive. She wants me to thrive. And that requires sometimes, I'll watch the kids so she can go out and hang out with friends. And sometimes she stays out later. If we were enmeshed, I'd be like, you can't ever stay out later. What are you doing? Be with me. You can't love them more than me. That's what you're doing when you stay out later. Now, at the same time, if she's staying out late all the time, you can't live as a single person when you're married. These are different examples. I want to also give you some other examples. So you can identify, am I enmeshed? Are the people around me enmeshed? So one of the ways this looks is when people around you, that they have to know everything, and so you tell them everything, and you expect them to tell you everything. So you share and say, well, I'm open, I'm honest, you need to do the same thing. That's enmeshment. So your kids know everything that's going on when there's things that they should not know what's going on. You expect people and you place demands. You should tell me this. What happened? What did they say to you? All right? Because you share things and probably overshare. Let me give you kind of an extreme example of enmeshment. Sometimes when a family's enmeshed, one of the examples is when they don't close the doors to the bathroom. Like, there's no boundaries. Even within bathroom stuff, there's no boundaries. And you might sit there and go, oh, well, that's just kind of, our family's just like that. Well, perhaps your family's enmeshed, because there's things that you're sharing that probably should be personal, but everyone has to know it, and you have to share everything about it. Enmeshment can lead to legalism. Like we talked about, you have to agree with someone on everything. It can lead to legalism where they take a particular issue that may be not theologically strong and they become legalistic about it. Or maybe it's theologically strong, but is divorced from the actual gospel, meaning that the principle is true, but the grace and the mercy that we find in Scripture is nowhere attached to the issue. And so therefore, they're speaking something that may be true, but there's no love at all. It's just condemnation and arrogance and pride. So enmeshment can lead to spiritual kind of legalism. It can lead to other forms of legalism as well. People who are politically legalistic, not that you can't be passionate about what you believe, but you begin to demean other people because they're not even humans. How could you possibly believe that? Now, this doesn't mean they could still be wrong, but this legalism is when you go into dehumanizing them to where you can treat them any way you want because you feel justified because they're idiots. Why would you do that? Enmeshed, you have to agree with me, and if you don't, then it's the end. Enmeshment can lead to codependency. It can lead to always trying to appease the least healthy person in the room. It's almost like a vortex of enmeshment, is that like when you get into that vortex, you have to kind of suck you in and you can't get out of it. You're just a part of it. And where you begin and they end is kind of hard to tell. It can lead to nepotism. Like you can ignore red flags. You can ignore things that are really important because, we are one. So you ignore things like this is where someone who, a parent might continue to cover for a child who's doing something completely wrong because they don't want them to look bad. Kind of an over-babying to some degree. This is enmeshment because, this is their baby or this is their child. Enmeshment can inflate problems. You can make things that are really small issues large issues because, again, it's about control. And if this little thing that you deviate from, it challenges that person's ability to control your situation because you're supposed to be the same. We're supposed to be on the same page. One of the greatest examples I've seen on TV when it comes to enmeshment is in Psych. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Psych, but you have Sean and Gus who are best friends. And if you watch the entire series, it's very obvious that they have an enmeshed relationship to the point where, they have this, certain catchphrase. I think one season it was like, "Come on, son," and they kept going back and forth with each other on that. And then one of them starts dating. The other person doesn't like that they're dating. How dare you? Because now she's a threat to our relationship. And then she says, "Come on, son." And he's like, "Wait a minute. That's our thing. You can't do that. You can't do that." So if you've ever seen Psych, and they've an episode where they focused on kind of Gus's and Sean's relationship, that's a perfect example of enmeshment. Enmeshment will lead to groupthink, where you get a group of people who think the same way. And therefore, they don't see when there's a problem because another philosophy is not allowed. So you can only, you don't see that there's an issue. So groupthink is where the entire team thinks the same way. So for example, say you guys are going to go on a trip and the enmeshed person says, "We need to be doing this." Well, the one friend who wants to be doing something different, they're often cut off because you're not a part of it, because you're not agreeing with us. And therefore, you don't get a different perspective. Groupthink. Also, someone who's enmeshed will not allow another person to grow. And often, if they're in an organization, they won't allow the organization to grow because as the organization grows, it impedes their ability to control that person. So what do you do? Well, first of all, you have to ask the Lord, "Lord, am I in a enmeshed situation? Do I act this way?" Because it open up our eyes when we deal with different situations. Because sometimes when someone gets upset with us, we think it's our fault. Now, granted, sometimes we just blame them, but it's really important to understand the root of why they're upset with something. And then ask God, how do you deal with this? At Red Church, we kind of have a leadership development system. And one of the things we do is we teach people to look out for red flags, things that are warning signs. Because when people lash out or when people say this is their problem, it's often not the real problem. When someone leaves or cuts off from someone and they're like, "We're not going to have that relationship," it's often not for the reason they say it is. We try to teach our people to be trained on how to see these red flags so we know how to love and care for people and how to respond. So maybe you're there and you're like, "Well, I kind of identified that there's probably somebody in my life who is enmeshed. What do I do?" Well, there's a way to be able to honor and love someone and not get pulled into their vortex, because that's what it's like when you're around someone that kind of demands that. It's like you can't get out. And I've experienced this from in my personal life. I had a family member who was very much like that, trying to pull everybody into their vortex. And if you did not go along with what they wanted, you're a horrible person. You had all sorts of bad motives. And so what I tried to do is I tried to find ways to honor them. I knew some of the things that they were good at, and so something I could learn from. So I would try to honor them by picking their brain about these things I knew they were good at. It also kept us sometimes from talking to some other issues that would lead them to gossip, slander, lead to arguments, things of that nature. And so I would try to honor them, and it helped me kind of get the conversation away. Like, "Hey, I really don't want to talk about that, but I really had a question. I know you're an expert in this area. Would you please, what do you think about this?" And so I found a way to honor them while at the same time I had to draw the line. Sometimes I had to say, "Look, I love you, and in a couple of days I'm going to call you because I know you're going to have good insight in this issue, but I'm not going to have this conversation right now. That's not something that, that's not appropriate. I love you, but what you're saying is not something I feel comfortable talking about." Now, this plays out depending on the degree of intimacy of your relationship as well, of what degree that you have to kind of deal with the situation. But there are times when you have to draw a hard line in some relationships. Like, for example, sometimes I've had somebody post on my social media feed that is just kind of berating anybody that has a different opinion than their own. And after trying to have multiple conversations with them, and they still wouldn't change it, they're essentially a bully. I had to ban them from my social media. And sometimes that has to happen. It's not something I like to do as a pastor. I haven't had to do that very often, but there are times I'm like, "Look, I'm not having those conversations. That's not okay." And that sometimes happens. Depending on who that person is in your life, they may be a close family member, they may be a spouse, they may be a child. You might not be able to draw such a clear line as banning them from your social media, but there are certain things that you can do. So one of the ways you can do it is you try to honor them if they're in your life and they're going to be in your life and you can't change that. Try to find ways to honor, to kind of steer conversations that way. If it's something where they're really, really toxic and they aren't a loved one, you might have to take extra steps. It's a case-by-case situation. I would ask that you would pray, ask the Lord for discernment, and act in grace, because we've all fallen short. So have grace, but sometimes it's needed. Further action is needed sometimes. Well, thanks again. If you have any other questions, or if there's a topic you'd like me to talk about, please drop a message down below. We'll look at it, see what we can do. But like, share, comment down below, whatever it takes. But look forward to our next video. But I'd really like to know what you'd like me to cover, so let me know. Talk to you later. Bye.